Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's time once again to Let's Talk Metal. Tonight's episode is kind of a neat idea that I had a little while back. I get a lot of comments on videos and during live streams saying that, thanks for introducing me to this band, or messages from folks saying, hey, I checked out this really cool album and I never would have known about it if you hadn't talked about it. So that's always really cool to hear. That's great if I can help folks discover some kind of obscure heavy metal bands that got looked over. Let's be honest, nobody's heard everything. Nobody's going to hear everything. And there are tons of great bands and great albums that just never got their due and are easy to overlook in the thousands and thousands of heavy metal releases that are out there now. So it's always very cool to hear that somebody checked out a band or an album that I mentioned and really enjoyed it. But it works the other way around too. There are lots of cool things that viewers and listeners have mentioned to me that I've gone and checked out and really enjoyed too, that I had never heard of before. And so that's kind of the theme for tonight's video. I wanted to let folks know that, yes, the professor does his homework as well. And I do go check out a lot of the stuff that everybody recommends. I can't always do it right away. Sometimes it takes a while to get around to it. And sometimes it slips my mind for a while. But I do try to check out a lot of the stuff that folks recommend for me, and some of those recommendations I really like. So tonight, I'm going to show off 3 albums that I liked enough that I went out and tracked them down and picked up copies of them as well. I don't always remember who recommends what, and I do apologize for that. Something I want to try to keep better tabs on moving forward. It sometimes is just hard in the middle of a live stream to not only write down, the name of a band and the right album title, but also, who recommended it. And it can be really hard to go back and find that out later on. If it was a comment in a chat in the middle of a 3-hour stream, it's tough to find. Or if it was a comment on a video, it's like, which video? Was it my video? Was it somebody else's video? So apologies to folks if I don't always remember who recommended something in particular, but the recommendations are appreciated, and a lot of them do turn out pretty cool. So I'm going to show off a few things that viewers recommended to me. We'll play a few sound clips so other people can check them out. Maybe you'll want to go track these down as well. First up tonight, we have an American power metal band from 1986 called Tension. The album is called Breaking Point. Pretty easy to spot cover there. Might be the same pair of hands from a certain Hellstar album cover. There's no lightning on this one, but I think you know where I'm going with that. Anyway, let's check out a little bit of Tension before we chat about the band. So this is going to be a clip from the track Reach for Your Sword. All right, there is some Tension, Reach for Your Sword. This is off their 1986 LP called Breaking Point. Very strong US power metal sound. You can probably get the sense that, it's borderline a little thrashy at times. Not on all the tracks, though. On the inner sleeve, there's kind of an unusual graphic here where it says RIP Deuce. And this has to do with the band's backstory. The band is out of the Maryland area, and they had existed for years under the name Deuce. When they went to record the album, however, they found out that another band was using that name, already had the rights to it, and so literally while they were kind of in the studio, They had to come up with a new name, and they decided on Tension, which is also a name that a lot of different bands have used over the time, but maybe hard to come up with something extremely original there on the spot. Tension album is very good. That's a good example of what it sounds like. It's, in that sort of, early metal church kind of style. Tension/Deuce has a little more back history to them as well, though. Deuce released an extremely rare single several years earlier. It's one of those kind of grail items for folks that collect indie releases from US heavy metal bands on 7-inch records. I've only seen it once or twice. It's an extremely rare piece. Probably their bigger claim to fame, though, is that a certain Marty Friedman was in the ranks of Deuce once upon a time. I don't think he's on the 7-inch or any other material they recorded, maybe on some early demos or something. But yeah, he was a member of the band before relocating, being members of projects like Vixen and Hawaii, before of course moving on to bigger and better things with Megadeth, and eventually a successful solo career over in Japan. So yeah, the Tension album is one. It got released on Torrid Records. Very small label. I've only seen about 5 or 6 things listed on Torrid's discography. Torrid is probably best known as the main label that first released Exodus's Bonded by Blood. And Torrid then, of course, that got released through Combat and much bigger labels. So yeah, you don't see a lot of stuff on the Torrid label. And the band Tension has mentioned that they were extremely unhappy, with the arrangements. There's the Torrid label. For example, they thought, that they had to fly out to California, I believe it was, to record. The equipment was so substandard that the band literally went out to try to rent and scrounge together different equipment to use because they couldn't get a decent sound with anything that the label was providing. The whole experience left a pretty bad taste in their mouth. They did demo some material in 1987 after the album's release, but that was about it. You can find some anthologies and collections of the Tension and Deuce material that have been released over the years. But yeah, the band didn't really get to do much else beyond that. So pretty cool album. One that you don't see around all that often. Not an extremely expensive album to my knowledge. I didn't pay a whole lot when I luckily stumbled across that in a local store. But yeah, a cool one for fans of that style. So big thanks to Frank. I do remember that Frank is the one who recommended Tension to me a while back and checked it out and liked that one quite a bit. All right, so let's move on to band number 2 this evening. This one also released in 1986, same as Tension, but over on the East Coast in New York. Well, sorry, Tension's on the East Coast too with Maryland. They were recording in California, so I got a little mixed up there for a second. But this band was up in New York. They were called Silent Listener, and they did this one 12-inch EP called Veterans of the Fight. Now, you look at that cover, and right away you're thinking, I don't think these guys are veterans of very many fights. Veterans of the fashion show, veterans of the runway, veterans of the mall. Probably more appropriate titles than veteran of the fight. But, hey, it's real easy to make fun of, fashion from 40 years ago. If you had been a teenager in 1986, probably you and every one of your friends would have killed to have that perm. So, sign of the times. Musically, though, this is not too bad. So we're going to check out a little bit of the second track from the EP called Seasons of the Witch.
Turn from evil.
right, so there is Silent Listener delivering pretty good on Seasons of the Witch. You would not expect this band from the photo to sound, quite that heavy. Really good guitar tone, has a nice, heavy crunch to it. Good kind of marching anthemic track there. And the EP is kind of a tale of two sides. The two tracks on side one, which are Veterans of the Fight and Seasons of the Witch, both very good. Pretty solid. Veterans of the Fight is a bit similar to this, maybe a little bit more up-tempo. So yeah, side A is really, really strong. Side B, not quite as much. You've got a track called If You Want to Rock. You can kind of tell where that's going to go based on the title. And then the fourth and last track is a cover of White Rabbit, which has got to be one of the most covered tracks by heavy metal bands. Kind of funny since Jefferson Airplane was not really a metal band or really considered that important to the history of heavy metal. It is not a bad cover. They actually do a pretty good rendition of White Rabbit. It's just that, if you're only going to record 4 songs, you're not trying to do a full album here. It only needs 4 tracks for this. You want to do 4 originals. You don't need 3 originals plus a cover. It's like, nah, that's not the way to wrap things up. So yeah, side B, a little weaker than side A for sure, but nevertheless, a pretty cool EP. This is one too. If you're seeing that cover, let's face it, 99% of us would not pick that up and take a look at it if we flipped past it in a box of records at a store. But yeah, in a comment section a while back, talking about, just kind of obscure, lesser known US metal stuff, somebody mentioned that, yeah, one of their go-tos for this style was Silent Listener. It's like, I've never even heard of that. I'll check that out. So I looked it up. It's like, okay, I have no idea what this is, but either somebody is, trolling me with this, but I don't think so. Let's go ahead and give it a spin. It's like, whoa, that's actually quite good. So I kept an eye out for it for a couple of months, found a cheap copy online, and picked it up and was very glad I did. So thanks for the Silent Listener shout out there, recommendation. It is a pretty good EP. If you can find it for a decent price, you get a couple of good songs on it. It's much stronger than the cover would have you believe. All right, we got one last one to check out tonight. And for this, we're going to look at a UK band. This band technically fits under the new wave of British heavy metal heading, although this album didn't come out until 1985, which is getting awfully late. Not a whole lot of stuff that came out in 85 would be considered new wave of British heavy metal. And this album itself definitely is starting to feel more like, the power speed metal from the middle of the decade than, say, the Saxon and Girl School albums from 5 years earlier. The band here is called Trojan, and the album is called Chasing the Storm. Pretty cool cover to this one. This is an old Roadrunner release. And let's check out a little bit of the title track, Chasing the Storm. All right, there you go. Trojan absolutely killing it. That's a banger right there. Chasing the Storm, lead-off track from the album of the same title, 1985 release on Roadrunner Records. So Trojan had existed for several years before this. I think their first release goes back to 1982, which was an EP, but it was a cassette-only release, and they demoed tracks in between. Trojan apparently had a bit of hype about them early on, but lineup instability meant that they never could follow up on that sort of initial burst of interest in the band, and that it took several years before a lineup was stable enough and to get an album in the can and then out on the streets. And by then, of course, the musical landscape had changed a lot. From 82 to 85, there's some pretty seismic shifts in the heavy metal underground. I have not heard any of the earlier material, so I can't say how similar or different it is to Chasing the Storm. It's one of those bands I've heard the name over the years and read, short entries about them here and there, but I just never had followed up on them. There are hundreds and hundreds of new wave of British heavy metal bands. Nobody's heard all of it. And especially these bands that maybe only had demos or cassette only releases, it's really tough to check that stuff out, until more recently when all that kind of stuff has become more readily available and accessible on YouTube. 20 years ago, you couldn't check out a band like Trojan if they weren't on vinyl somewhere. It was hard to access their material. Heck, it was hard to access the vinyl material by most of these bands. The cassette material was extremely hard to track down. And this album, frankly, I just don't remember ever coming across this album in the past. If I had, I'd like to think I would have stopped and given it a look based on the cover, but I do not know. Anyway, this is one that, again, somebody had recommended in the comment section, and they even brought it back up in a live stream chat a while back. So again, apologies that I don't remember the username, but they had recommended it as like a really good sort of later new wave of British heavy metal title. And this was one of those cases where the timing was just right, that I saw the comment, and literally like 20 minutes later, I was grading papers. I was like, let's throw on that Trojan that somebody just recommended, and was instantly blown away. The bad news was that the original Roadrunner vinyl has become one of those kind of mid-priced, it's just expensive enough that you got to really, really want it to, shell out, the 50 to $100 that it's always listed for. The good news was that very soon thereafter, it got a CD reissue. So, yay for me. This was on, I think, Cult Metal Classics. 2 discs set. The other disc is, let's see, Live at the Dynamo Club. It's got almost the exact same track listing as the album, so you hear most of the tracks as a live setting also. And this is now readily available from lots of distributors online. If you like the clip you heard, highly recommend picking it up. If there's a knock against the album, it's the production. Yes, it is a little bit, thin sounding, but it can't hide, the really raging power that some of these tracks have. Excellent album. Thank you very much for the recommendation. And that is going to do it for this edition of The Professor Does His Homework. I have turned in my 3 assignments for the night, so now let's talk metal in the comments down below. What did you think of these 3? If the original folks who recommended Silent Listener and Trojan happen to see this, by all means, please leave a comment down below and stake your claim. Again, I apologize for not having everyone's names for these releases. I tried going back and looking for them, but it's hard to track that back down. Something that I'll try to keep better notes on moving forward, because I'm hoping I can do more installments of this in the future, that as I check out other stuff that viewers and listeners recommend to me, I'll check them out, and the ones that I really like and track down, I'll set aside and do another video on another day. But until then, it's time to wrap this up. So, as always, everybody take care and keep banging your head.